In this consumer society in which we live, we are taught to function, to consume, and continue consuming mechanically, manipulated with a single purpose: to make money. Now the question is, do we want to continue to be functional in this wicked system? Fill the Void is a concept and a critical thinking community. We seek to raise awareness about the importance of mental and emotional health in our community. Do you feel empty in your day-to-day? Relax, you're not alone. Fill the Void exposes the symptoms of our society. Our Fill the Void ecosystem seeks to inspire a cultural change that generates real well-being so people learn to live more satisfactorily. Welcome to Fill the Void podcast, where we discuss unhealthy human habits caused by the society of consumption. Hi, Dr. Vitaly. Thank you so much for coming to this interview. I'm so excited to talk to you about physical health.
Yes.
You're a physical therapist here in New York City. Well, first of all, I wanted you to tell us a little about yourself and how did you get into physical therapy, a little bit about your background, and how did your fascination for physical health started?
Sure. I have a faint memory of my sister once saying that she remembers me telling her that I was saying that I could control the temperature of my body, right? Yeah. I was a little kid, and I actually remember almost exactly when this was happening. We used to walk to elementary school together, which was within walking distance. This is when you allowed your kids to walk freely outside, even in Brooklyn. Even growing up in Brooklyn, you still were some neighborhoods you could walk outside a little easier in the morning. And I remember sharing that with her. And I mentioned that to you because I think some people have some level of intuition. Artists can maybe have a gift with sound, with visualization, even with speaking. I think there's an art form that some of us, have maybe more of. And I think in my case, I had maybe an intuition with my hands. And so even from an earlier age, my grandparents would ask me to massage their backs or something. And for some reason, I like to do it. So, I kind of enjoyed what I was doing. But, I think from that early age, I already was training my hands to feel. And then when I was 14, I got hit by a car riding my bike. I fractured 2 of my lumbar vertebrae. Thankfully, I'm not paralyzed and there was no need for surgery. But I had a really bad experience with physical therapy. And even though I went on to then swim competitively in high school, we were Brooklyn champions.
Nice.
There 3 years in a row, Brooklyn champions. In hindsight, I've always wondered if something happened to my left shoulder, my left hip, and I'm using careful language when I mention that. But in any case, I had a really bad experience. My high school swim coach, his cousin was a chiropractor, told me, go to chiropractics. A little more about me. My family and I refuged from the Soviet Union as Jews to America. It was a pilgrimage through, in my case, Austria. Some other migrants went to Italy as well. And then it was, London or maybe parts of Europe if you were lucky, if you had family, Israel, of course. And then everybody wanted to go to America.
Yes.
And so we came straight to New York. We had family here. So as a Soviet Jew hearing, go to where the money is, well, I'm hearing stability. So I thought initially I wanted to be a chiropractor. I studied exercise science at Syracuse University. And it's where I really fell in love with the human body on an even grander scale because there's so much complexity to it. I mean, we could sit here, I know we're going to hopefully stay on task. I know both of us like to chat, but there's so much to discuss about the human body, right? It's such a complex thing, and really more of late, I think we are the aliens. We keep looking for these UFOs. I think we are the aliens, and we just forgot how to use this vessel, and that's something more powerful. Maybe we can deviate to. And
but I love what you're saying, because I was gonna say exactly, the human body is so complex, and we forget completely about our bodies. We're just in automatic mode all the time, just functioning. But we forget that our body is made up of cells and different organs, muscles, bones, and everything requires a conditioning in a way. So also, Tell me.
I actually had a theory about that because I was, I was trying to prepare for our this podcast,
Yes.
and I did a little microdose with a buddy of mine of psilocybin,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just sort of vocalizing what I wanted to discuss, and I had shot my pilot recently, and it dawned on me, what our conversation ultimately is going to trail into, or this is
Yes.
it. This is us trailing into it
Yes.
is, and I'll get back to maybe, more about physical therapy and how I got into this, but we are designed to be in either two states. And I think you and I mentioned this, right? Fight or flight,
Yes.
or rest and digest, right? Sympathetic, parasympathetic.
Exactly.
And because if there was if right now, mid podcast, all of a sudden your building was on fire, you would get Roberta's superhuman strength,
Yes.
grab whatever you needed to grab, even though you're not supposed to grab anything, you're just supposed to get out. But nonetheless, you'd have superhuman strength.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of this human body. We're designed to be in this, it's not addicting, it's actually life-saving to be in this sympathetic response. Like I have to constantly stay focused, stay driven, because it's actually innately better for me to be in that response, because it's often tied to a life or death situation. In this case,
exactly,
we're taking taxes and we're putting it in the same bandwidth as like that stress response of a fire in the building. And of course, we enjoy functioning at that level. And
exactly. And the most important part is that is healthy, like being in this
right, and that's fitness,
exactly. But the problem in the society in current times is that we don't know how to de-stress or to like come down of those moments. So if we're constantly in that like fight or flight mode and we never come down, like the cycle never completes itself of like the stress coming up and down, and that's when we enter in these like unhealthy areas. But so, and also talking to add to what we're talking about, like the resting and pausing in our society now is seen as weakness, because everyone's like, you're busy, you work better, you work more. And like, so in this society that we live in, which is unhealthy by default, how should we approach physical health regarding all this idea that we're talking about?
Well, it's again, just going back into those two things, that sympathetic fight or flight, or parasympathetic rest and digest. And if you break that down, right, from just a science perspective,
yes,
if there really was a fire in the building, you would be panting, right? You'd be really quick. Let me grab. You know what I mean, honey? Get up. Let's get out of the
yes,
apartment, or guys, burning building. Let's get out. And we've figured that out, right? It's all about the biochemistry of the body,
mm-hmm.
right? And it starts with the respiratory rate, right? How quickly am I breathing? And that's fixated to our heart rate. And mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times you have to start with just the breath. Let's talk you down off the ledge, right? So the best way for, right, yeah, it's great to sometimes get into the fast lane and focus mm-hmm. and accomplish. And, you and I happen to live in New York City, so there's no ceiling to where those accomplishments can get.
Exactly.
And there really is a cost-reward analysis where oftentimes hard work will yield great results, and that's why it's addicting,
Exactly.
But to have better clarity on that road to success, it's so important to create disparity of that. Let's relax. Let's
exactly.
That sigh, that breath of fresh air, and
breathing. It's like, so it's like an unconscious thing, but like making it conscious, it's so important. Yes. Exactly. So the system that we live in, mainly like the healthcare system and more in the US, it's all about intervention instead of prevention. So what would you say are your 5 non-negotiable to really improve the quality of life regarding physical health in humans?
Sure. Thankfully, I'd like to think that me and a bunch of other colleagues who happen to have a boutique practice where it's still patient forward and mm-hmm. one-on-one for the bulk of that hour, the whole hour really, we have time to create not just intervention but prevention, right? Yes. And preventative care, and it's almost gotten its own name. It's called prehab, right? Rehab is the reactionary, but prehabbing is maybe some of the golden nuggets mm-hmm. that you can always sort of do with you, and based on what population you're in. You can plant those person specific, population specific. I think some negotiables, probably sounds redundant to me to say, but certainly worth repeating. It's what we're touching on, right? It's the recovery. So what does recovery look like? Well, it's often sleep.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And look, this is the city that never sleeps. So that's an oxymoron to ask someone in this mega metropolis of go to prioritize their sleep.
Exactly.
But we know that athletes are doing it, right? If we're going to compare the layperson to somebody who's quote unquote superhuman, what are they doing that works, and how can I multiply that, to scale for me? Well, okay, let's double down on sleep. If I can't work on sleep, maybe there's a way to create recovery consciously, right? Maybe it's just gazing off into, a vastness. So it could be, walking through a forest. I think walking is really key. So Nobel laureate Rick Kandel identified osteocalcium as the molecule that boosts through walking. And that has been associated with, there's a relationship between that and Alzheimer's, right? So an increase in osteocalcium in the brain has a negative correlation to, dementia or Alzheimer's, prevalence of dementia of Alzheimer's. So walking, I think, is so key.
Yes.
And by the way, there's walking desks. So, for all the nut jobs who really need to, stay focused, or at the very least, look, it's not nut jobs. No, I'm just as crazy.
Yeah.
But, a standing desk, right? Just position variability. I'm clearly seated right now, and, if this light stand was working, I'd probably put it up, and maybe I would stand. Just having some flexibility to that. So sleeping, ideally, we're looking for, let's say 7 to 9 is a really far reach for some folks. I think if you can get yourself in that lower range of 6 to 7, and even if that fluctuates, if the median is about 6 to 7, it really should be 8 to 9. We know is great, but baby steps, right? Start,
Exactly.
just every 20 minutes shifting around and just being consistent with that. That's most important.
Yes.
I think position variability, whether you work from home or you're working at the office these days, your desk should have some flexibility to it. Hydration, right?
Key.
So key. Now,
points.
by the way, there was a headline the other day that some younger woman, unfortunately, 2 kids, and passed away of overhydration.
Wow, it's crazy.
And believe it or not, that's not the most uncommon during marathons or any races. Oftentimes, amateur runners are told to stay hydrated, and so they'll throw back a full glass overhydration, and you can get brain swelling because it's biochemistry, right? Just like the breath will change the biochemistry so that everything calms down and you get into the parasympathetic. Sometimes having enough water, because after all, the big things that are supposed to move us, that are supposed to stimulate the brain, or the muscles, they're primarily water-based. We are primarily water-based.
Exactly.
So, using your urine as a litmus test, right? So staying hydrated.
Yes.
And what's the fifth? I guess nutrients. Let's look at nutrients.
Exactly. Food intake.
Food. I think
Yeah.
look, you could get the cheap 87 gas, or you can get the 93 gas. And if you put 87 in a high performance vehicle, it may not shit out the first time, but
I love this analogy.
You know what I mean? So it's like what you're putting in has a direct performance on what you're putting out.
And it's crazy how now all of the food system in America is basically processed foods with all kinds of chemicals, and that's why everyone ends up with cancer, basically.
Well, they won't tell you that.
No. It's crazy how you mentioned like hydration, walking, nourishment, and all these things that take me back to like when humans were wild animals, basically. And now we have become these like tamed creatures, like dogs. Dogs were wolves before, and now like they were tamed and they became dogs. Little
pet projects.
The same that happened to us, and basically we should go back to that primal state of self that we were once, and go to the basics, because everything has evolved so much that it comes to a point where all these things have been forgotten, and that's why there's like this DNA mismatch from
I'll tell you, so I agree with you. And what's happened is we're still operating like we're savage dogs and wolves.
Yes.
But not everyone exposes their physicality to that. So it doesn't match, right? The physical stress is here, but the mental stress is here. Whereas
Exactly.
both usually they're closer together. And that's where kind of fitness comes into play, where you can you create variability for your nervous system. Much like I'm saying, create variability in your breath, create variability in your movement. The movement being, don't sit all day, stand a little bit, lay down on the floor, slouch on your back, get into the poorer postures if you want, if that's what you want to call them. They're not poor postures, it's a different posture. And I think we equally need that physical stress, lift weights, run in the park, do some calisthenics, jump rope, play soccer, whatever it is, but you need movement, and that movement sometimes has to, if you're operating like a race car driver because you're in the finance community, which is what a lot of my patient demographic is, I need to expose you to the same physicality so that you can clear your mind, because after all, the physical stress will flush out the psyche to prioritize the physicality, because at the end of the day, without this you can't have that, right? And vice versa.
Exactly. And the stress in the head also affects the physical body.
Absolutely. That's why you have to constantly challenge it from both sides. Meaning exercises for the brain are breathing exercises, meditations, mantras, maybe yoga, slower movement, not always operating in fast, right? You have to learn to operate in slow, get into a cold plunge and just regulate your breath, get into a sauna, do sound bathing, and that's the beauty of 2023. We know this now, right? And thankfully it's gaining more mainstream, and the fact that we're even discussing this, on this podcast, and it's being echoed in, many others, I'm sure.
Yeah, but also what people complain about, they're like, oh, I work a 9 to 5, my 9 to 5 job. So where and when can I do all these things that I have to take care of for my body? I don't have time to do all these things. What would you tell these people? How can they be able to start looking at this?
I just finished reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography, and especially as one immigrant to another, and he revolutionized fitness and really done so much for that world and wellness. And he was asked the same question as a governor, I think as a sitting governor, because he was the governor of California. How can you, a student was complaining about how the state owes them money and tuition's going up. And how can I be expected to work if I'm, busy studying? And Schwarzenegger, of course, is such an overaccomplished figure. Turns around and he goes to the student. Okay, so what's your class schedule? And it's 5 hours. Okay, great, 5 hours. So the day has 24 hours. What are you telling me? You're not available? Oh, well, I gotta hang. No, listen, man. Life requires priorities. Your health requires priorities.
Exactly.
By the way, I'm not perfect, right? I understand the gospel, and I certainly look to the gospel, and I try to live up to the gospel, and being equally okay with not being militant to the God. Yeah, we spoke about this. Yeah, it's so key. You got to be forgiving with yourself, because it's a marathon. That's what we tell patients and clients. It's a long, long marathon. Have short-term goals, have long-term goals, have really long-term goals, and have fun with it, right? You have to be fluid. You can't just be fixated to one story of the gospel.
Exactly. It's like a dance. We don't have to be so hard on ourselves when we couldn't reach that level of that we wanted to do. It's there's ups and downs. We have to be very flexible. That is the key, because also then we get caught in this cycle of society where you want to reach these expectations which are unreal, and then you never reach them, so you frustrate, and then you're never able to move forward. You fall down again in the same cycle. And so I want to make a distinction in in reality, talk about this fine line of taking care of yourself with positive deeds versus using the positive deeds as a coping mechanisms to ignore underlying problems that we have. Like how many people can relate with waking up every morning with lingering symptoms, damaged sore muscles, grumbling stomach, and joint pains, for example. But that hunger for addiction still there every day, no matter all of the symptoms. Like, when does exercising become this physical issue, and what are the thoughts, and how can you tell us like how we can recognize our body's limits when when we cannot detect these like physical issues?
Very loaded question, or a series of questions, and
Yeah.
I looked over these, of course, a little beforehand. I appreciate you sharing. It's a complex one, right? Because we are complex, right? And your threshold and my threshold may vary, and that's the beauty of like the subjective experience, right? You're the director, screenwriter, and main star of your movie, and I'm much the same with mine.
Exactly.
And when is too much, when is going too far too much, and like I think we were speaking about like the athlete, right? And I was Mikhail Shinipsniak, who identified flow state. When I tore my ACL, I was reading a different book by Stephen Kotler, a similar narrative about just identifying flow, and when you're in the zone, and you're a competitive athlete, like you could get hurt, but like the game's got to finish, right? And the heat's got to complete itself. Like I thought, I tore my ACL. You get back on that bike and you ride back to the office, and I almost did. And I didn't take an ambulance, but I said it did not, just for the record. But there is a diagnosis called athletico nervosa, and that is essentially doing too much exercise to a point where then it actually starts to tamper your biochemistry because you're outpacing your body's reserves. Often it's fat reserves, which is like, oh, I don't want to hear that fat, that evil word. But believe it or not, your fat is your main precursor to your hormones. So if you're not, going back to the nutrients and sustenance, if you're not providing the right kind of sustenance to your body, it'll turn on you. And once you disrupt the hormone balance, then you're now in really not unknown territory. We know that it's going to fail. It's just when it's going to fail. And so, you mentioned like the churning of the stomach or some joint pain. Look, if you're exercising and you're trying to constantly provide what's known as progressive overload, meeting that threshold, right? You're functioning with your mind over here. I need to bring your physical body close to it. You should have some soreness. You could have some soreness, I should say. But when does that soreness become like too much? And I'll tell you, even in my own journey of late, I was telling you how I decided to stop working out for 3 months, like really, and then stopped almost all major interventions for the past 2 months. I was recovering from another car accident last year, and you would think me, who has full awareness of my body and my mind-body connection, or you would think, right? I was able to ignore some of my signs, right? And how, like, the lingering back pain, I likened it to the pain has ebbs and flows to it. And what we tell patients or clients is identify that pain, qualify that pain, meaning how long was it lasting? Was it sharp shooting, dull, throbbing, aching? Is there variation in that, right? Because that could tell me as a medical professional a lot on the history of this, right? Let's paint a bigger picture. As a physical therapist, I'm kind of caught in the crossfire sometimes because people will have metabolic issues going on, and I have to recognize it, as a doctor of physical therapy, to then refer out to who they may need to see to maybe escalate the situation. So I think just don't be an alarmist, for better or worse. Time often heals all wounds. So give yourself the benefit of the doubt. They used to say, take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. It's kind of like that, generally 2 weeks before things go from acute to subacute. But if you feel like you're picking up on bigger clues and things are progressively getting worse, right? Reach out. I mean, these days, everyone should have a physical therapist available to them. It's like, having a good human engineer available. Like, hey, something doesn't sound right. You take your car in. Well, back in the day, you used to take your cars in when they were more combustible cars, and hey, the engine doesn't sound right, and the guy would just, my dad, I remember, he would turn it on and rev the gas, and just based on what he's hearing, how are the pistons moving, how's it going through the muffler,
Exactly.
This is where we got to like take a look at, turn the key off, open the hood, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So be patient. That's a tough word. Be
Yeah.
patient if you can. Give it a week at the very least, a couple of days. Don't rush to put ice on it. Don't rush to take. We work on Broadway and we try to discourage anti-inflammatories.
Mm-hmm.
If you got hurt, there may be room for anti-analgesic, like a pain modulator, and Tylenol is often that, if that works for your stomach. Ice can be used for pain modulation, but inflammation is good. Circulation is better. Be patient with your body, stay with the symptoms, make a journal. As the subjective experience, again, my threshold, your threshold can vary.
Exactly.
Don't dismiss your feelings but don't equally dial 911 unless you're bleeding out, in which case definitely dial 911.
Exactly, exactly. And like going on the same line, what can you say about extreme sports? And personally, I've done a lot of extreme sports throughout my life, also in a way to fill the void with that adrenaline rush, you know what I mean? So is this a way to fill the void by extreme sensations in the physical body?
I'll tell you, first of all, yes, hell yes, hell yes. I mean, if I'm going to tell you to like go meditate and focus on breathing to a point where you slow down your heart rate so much, why couldn't I tell you go to that skyscraper, jump out of that plane, jump off that
Exactly.
bridge? Look, if as long as safety is taken into account, maybe don't put on the bird suit if you've not like trained to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think again, having a range and variability to like heightened experiences. Take a little microdose, get deeper into the psyche, right? I mean, there's take a macrodose. Shit, I don't know. If it's in the right setting, uh, I think everything has a time and a place. My dad
Exactly.
always used to say, live in moderation,
Very,
and I
very
know that's
important.
very important. This is a man raised in the Soviet Union, so he knew his priorities,
Mm-hmm.
and it really is moderation is key. Too much of anything is not great. But hey, if you're a talented BMXer or snowboarder, and you've got Olympic goals that you want to amass to, or world championships, hell yeah! Who am I to stop you from competing against other crazy daring individuals, right? I think there's
Mm-hmm.
the beauty. I mean, I'm in the world of movement and body and mind exploration. So I think let's live to the best of our capability.
And what is the link between like, of course, the body and the mind, but related to the mushrooms and the microdose usage?
Well, I think it's catching a lot of headway. We started from like I think I started,
Yes.
you know what I mean, on my own path, as many, I think, before me,
Yes.
until only now it's become more mainstream. And I think we're seeing it more with our armed forces, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the military personnel coming back from, really bad places. And they've got some scars that are, I think back in the day after Vietnam, they used to call it shell shock,
Yeah.
right? And now we understand I don't think you're supposed to even call it post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm,
I think there's another now pseudonym that the DSM just updated.
okay.
But creating, hate on the Gen Zers, the millennials, and creating a safe space. But, what's beautiful about today's generation is that we
Mm-hmm.
are exploring the power, right? If we're going to go to the four agreements,
Exactly.
Paul
Yeah.
Coelho, your word is the impeccable magic spell that you're putting out there, and even how you speak to yourself is the
Yes.
magic sauce, right?
Exactly.
Right down to like self-shaming, which one of my favorite comedians, Brian Callen, is like that's his shtick, right? But how you speak to yourself and you speak to others, and what we said earlier in the episode, how we're aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Rogan and Brian Callahan were on on a recent podcast together, and they were discussing how the ancient Aramaic language has a numerology tied to it, and the
Wow.
numbers have always like scared me because like that sounds like it's the dial-up key, the
Yes.
up down left right, select start. It's how we get transported up, and the true deep meditation I think goes into that, and
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's like to bring awareness fully of the power of the mind and the
Right.
body.
And I think when you introduce these, in the case of psilocybin, I forgot my chain of thought
Yes.
there as I went off into the alien thing. I just got so mesmerized. But I think it unlocks the psyche. I think ketamine is another, this disassociative that I think
Yeah.
in controlled dosing with often a therapist, a healthcare professional
Uh-huh.
with you. I've done a sound bath where that, in addition to MDMA now, which I think is like the ecstasy of yesteryear. That's
Yeah.
getting a resurgence again, and I think it all started again with armed service personnel coming back. Excuse me, with a lot of a lot on their plate. They weren't able to process, and it's a great way, I think, for addressing trauma and
Yeah.
oftentimes it's all about graded exposure, much like fitness or anything else, right? Moderation. If we reintroduce those
Exactly.
instances to you, maybe their strength will get lesser and less because you're calling a spade a spade. It's the elephant in the room. And what I think some of these active agents help is break your inhibition to seeing them, right?
Exactly.
Let's see it.
Exactly.
Let's see it. Let's see it. It's no longer, now I've habituated. I've seen it now so much. I don't even see it anymore.
Exactly. How important.
Namaste, baby.
Yes. And I always like to ask these kind of questions about AI technology, current times, and like we were talking, how like the wild man and this DNA mismatch. And in current times, how like AI is intertwining in all aspects of our life. And I like to ask these questions to the different professionals that I talk to see like what's your viewpoint in this case with AI and physical health for the profession itself, but also for the people's physical health and how this technology is affecting.
First of all, let me put on my dork hat because you're like touching on a major issue that I have, and that's I'm behind on where I need to be as far as my mind's concerned. So
Mm-hmm.
first of all, Skynet is real. They're communicating. We're screwed, and no, I think it's going to be great, right? Because Roberta, as unique as you think you are, and as unique as I think I am, Google's got us figured out. Apple's got us
Yes.
figured out. The algorithm is there, and they're looking at us every single time. All our movements are tracked essentially. I was looking at how speed racing with boats, the complexity of metrics that is being calculated because these boats like rise out of the water,
Yeah.
and that person who's collecting some of that data. I mean, of course, the computer is processing it, but somebody sees it and then they relay it into the boat captain's ear, and he then makes a real-time decision on, is this information valid to me, right? Like I think they're picking up
Yes.
on current, on wind. If you cut it close enough, and every other team sees the other person's metric.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
it's so crazy and it's so fast. These boats are flying through the water, right? And why do I bring that up? Because processing data, I think we have the supercomputer. It's in our hands
Yes.
every day. But I think they're building it out even bigger supercomputers to tackle questions like string theory and how do you play out the same scenario like 40 million times instead of 400 times. And
Yeah.
that's just in itself to me is always like, whoa, I can't conceptualize that,
Mm-hmm.
numbers. It's like overpowering me, that to that extent. AI, I think, is going to bring a great thing to our profession. It's already doing it. I'm working with an Israeli startup.
Mm-hmm.
They put a tracking system on my phone. The phone has an accelerometer. It has a gyroscope
Yes.
meter, and that's great for GPS and tracking where you are. But
Uh-huh.
that also can, if wearables do that. I've got my Whoop, I've got the Aura here.
Yes.
They're getting better about tracking just movement. So this Israeli startup has its target audience isn't maybe at the moment. It's not like a fully capable subject. It's
Yes.
somebody maybe who's like older and isn't
Perfect.
moving enough. And if we can pick up on like a limp and they just had surgery, then, the information is being read, much like in that boat, on the phone. Then that goes to the physical therapist that's monitoring your case.
Wow.
Then they go, hey, Roberta, what's going on? I see you've been limping all day today.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible.
Right? And then we're going to get to a point where you're not wearing a brace anymore, or you don't need crutches.
Exactly.
The brace that you have on offloads by a certain amount because it's got hydraulics in it.
Crazy.
And now today is your deadline from going from toe touch, which is like 0.25% weight bearing, to half weight bearing body weight, right? And what if your body weight is fluctuating? Like, this thing will be able to give it to you to the pound, or to the gram.
Incredible. That's incredible. And also, I've read that there was a machine through Bluetooth that they connected the brain to the spine, and disabled person was able to walk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, Neuralink is what Elon Musk is doing.
Yes.
Yep. And that's just, the transcendence is we're going to become cyborgs.
Exactly. But also technology, in my opinion, brings like a lot of sedentarism. Even myself, like, I'm working from home all day and basically sitting in a chair all day. Yeah,
but if you went and you put on the Quest, the Google Quest VR, and you did like boxing, right? You might get a sweat, and you're totally right. I think AI is going to be able to like provide some equal like mental engagement, right?
Yes.
For like our older populations, so that we can keep the mind fresh, because you need the mind to have the body, and you need the body to have the mind.
Exactly.
I think with every gift, there's maybe a little bit of a curse. Moderation. Balance. Balance is the answer. Yes. So,
Vitaly, my last question for you is, I have two more questions. Like the burnout, what we say burnout, has become the fastest growing issue in physical therapy in the past few years, and more since the start of the pandemic. So what's the effect of the pandemic on physical health? What have you seen in your patients?
I think burnout really in healthcare has always been fairly rampant, just because I think the nature of the profession, you're sort of giving.
Yes.
And there's also like that Hippocratic oath, I won't do any harm. So not only are you trying to give, but like you're really trying to be the best problem solver, and within your scope of work, right? And so I think it's always been tougher. And I think because healthcare workers were essential, which probably was a gift for us in some respect, because you could still do your job during that period of time. But if you were in the hospital, I wouldn't want that job, right?
Yeah.
But at the while this crisis that the world was sort of living through, some people had time to process it. I think healthcare workers didn't. So it went from like, well, there's a fire outside, but I'm just going to keep ignoring it. And fine, the fire is sort of cooled off, but like, can I address my traumas?
Exactly.
And I think maybe that's, if you're good enough, you'll recognize it. I think it's somewhat known in healthcare that burnout is pretty prevalent. I think also priorities are shifting. Global attention is narrowing, for the lack of a better word, because we're all sitting in our echo chambers and we're only hearing what's most relevant to us, and that probably has a waning effect on how we're living. Sorry, the second part to that. So how is it like? What have I seen in fitness?
In physical health in the pandemic after.
It's if I can be frank, it's how honest we are with each other. Like, they don't call it the COVID-19 for nothing, right?
Exactly.
You may have put on a little bit of extra weight. You may not have stressed your body or mind to operate at a certain caliber. So like when you get back to the gym and all of a sudden you're going to those same intensity levels that you thought you were probably ready for, I'm actually seeing, we're seeing a little bit of a spike in injury rates, in part because people think they're still there. I mean, people always thought that they were like their high school best,
Yes.
That was always like a common reason for injury. But now everyone's like, oh, I was my pre-COVID best. And unless like you really made fitness your goal during the pandemic, if you had a lapse, and that's great, that's okay. Just be honest and humble about it. It's always the toughest to start in the beginning, but nothing is actually most exciting than the beginning, because the level of perceived change is so great. Like, you're literally seeing yourself get better. Whereas like at some point, if you're operating already at a high threshold, like you got to jump out of the plane. Otherwise it doesn't feel like it's there anymore. And that's why jumping out of the plane is also good for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
A nice reminder of where things lie in perspective.
Yeah. So what would you say to a person, like some key thoughts to how to reconnect with their bodies if they're having trouble with it? And how can this person be more aware of their physical health if they don't put the attention on that?
That's, $1 billion question, right? How do you convince somebody to see the gospel?
Yeah, exactly.
I think, at one point we were like, you have to do 30 minutes of cardio. Then we said, okay, just break up the 30 minutes into 3 10-minute rounds.
Yeah,
Now we're saying just do something.
exactly.
And I think that's it. That's the magic. If you could just add a little bit of something to break, what's great about being a type A personality is, you're very goal oriented. And I think that is also the curse of that personality type. And that personality type, again, that's going back to that work ethic, maybe is a word to say. How much you put in is how much you get out. That's like a universal law.
Yeah.
So it's striking that balance of breaking that routine is creating balance for yourself. Social media can be great. It connects. It shares. I think if you don't limit yourself with that as well, we had a staff member say, hey, I did a disconnect weekend and it was great, went into nature. That's such an important thing. Just something as small as that. Exactly. I was actually going to say, my gut reaction to your question was get in the park and just lay down on the ground, if you can, and, look up in the sky.
That's so important, even to touch with our bare feet, the earth,
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Vitaly, for these incredible insights and knowledge on physical health.
Thank you.
How important it is. Yes. So everyone, balance is the key to everything. Don't get frustrated if you don't meet the expectations, just one step at a time, right?
Sleep, hydrate, breathe, move around, and sustenance. Make sure you're getting those 5 key tenets, reevaluate them, and moderation. There's a balance in being balanced.
Thank you, Dr. Vitaly.
Thank you. Take care, Roberta.